In the new 1.14 Minecraft update, villages have had a proper makeover, and I will be the first to say that I think they actually look really cool. They aren't the most detailed thing in the world, but they are certainly more in line with everything else in the game. There are many village types, all with unique looking buildings, depending on the biome which you find them in, such as the plains, the desert, the savanna, the snowy tundra, and the taiga biome. However, if you look at the villagers within these villages, you can see that they also have unique clothing depending on where you find them. So you'll see that the plains villagers have that look that we all know and love, but those in the snowy tundra are all wrapped up warm. However, there are two variants that are not naturally generated, and those are the jungle villagers and the swamp villagers. Now, I don't know if Mojang intends on making these villages, but we have the villagers here, so I think we can assume that they will do. But since they're not in the game right now, I thought it would be fun to theorize what these villages would look like had they been in the update. So I'm going to make an entire swamp village in the same style and the same buildings that are in all of the others to try and theorize what a swamp village might look like. Let's get into it. And here I am in a swamp biome, so there's quite a lot of work that goes into making a village, and it's actually really difficult to know where to start. So I think the first thing we should actually do is go and analyze an actual village so I know where to begin. This is the nearest village to me, and this one actually has a lot of buildings very close together. So every single town or village has this centerpiece, this town center with a bell, and if you knock it, all the villagers go running home. Or not. What are you doing? This update is so buggy. And this particular village has the pathways going out in most directions in like a big cross shape, and then it's got some extra ones. The paths are 3 blocks. I think I can work with this. So the obvious place to start is with this town center. So let's go back to the swamp and get started now that we know roughly what a village looks like, or an example of one. Each village has its own unique set of blocks, and I'm going to go for dark oak and dark oak fence, so I think this will fit in. I don't want it to have any of the same blocks that the other villages have, just so that it seems a bit more unique. So for the town centre, I thought what I'd do is have a cauldron, so it's more like a witch's place, and have a bell on the top. Now, I'm going to do my best to try and keep this as Mojang style as possible, not Grian style, because if I was making this, I would definitely have a nether brick fence there so that it's not connected, because that really hurts. But the nether brick definitely would never get used here because it belongs in the nether. So we have to put up with the fact that it doesn't look as good as it could. However, I think that's a good start for the town centre itself. And now we just need to decorate around here. And it seems like every single village that's on grass uses the path blocks. So let's make like a little town centre around this part here. Now, the reason that I went for a cauldron is because in the swamp, I really don't think you would need a well because there's so much water around anyway. So if we start making a path going out this way, we very quickly hit the water. Now, by looking at all of the other villages out there, what happens when they hit water is it just turns to wood. So basically, along the pathways, we just have to fill it in with some dark wood. And that continues even if it goes into open water like this. I think it's pretty safe to start with just a bunch of paths and then make the houses around them. This sheep... Hold on, is he going to do it again? Yeah, look at him go! Oh, hold on. I think I've worked out why there are no villages in the swamp. Hear me out. So, based on these sheep's behavior... Look, they're in the water along with some seagrass here. Now, if I plant a pillager in there, I think he's going to behave in exactly the same way. I think he's going to get permanently stuck. Let me move further away. Is he going to spin round when he tries to move? Yeah, look, there they go. just spinning round. So I think the AI or the pathing doesn't work. Let's see what happens if I put a villager here in the town center. The pillager's definitely trying to go after him, but can't. So I theorize the reason that there is no swamp village is because the pillagers can't cope with being in the water. I think that the pathing... Imagine this, though. Imagine there was a big swamp village here. The pillagers spawned over here. They'd have to trudge through the water very slowly, and then they'd probably get stuck in a lot of the seagrass. I think realistically, the pillagers aren't good enough to go through the water, and the pathing has issues like this. So I think we've found the reason that there are no swamp villages. And I imagine it's a similar situation in the jungle with vines and other grass and stuff. But that's definitely not going to stop us making our swamp village. Okay, I think that's enough pathways, and I think that's probably what it would end up looking like. Because there's so much water, all of this wood does look really strange. I've tried to have the paths go off in all sorts of directions, left loads of grass blocks in between them. I've had to remove some trees, but I'm sure we can pop those back in at the end. So I think what we should do first is actually figure out what a single small swamp hut looks like, and then we can go from there making all the different varieties. Let's start by making one just here. And we're going to make sure that we use all of the dark oak blocks. We're going to use dark oak wood. We're going to use the fences, everything. Want to keep it in line, and none of the other villages use this palette. So it's really important to me that we try and make this look as Mojangy as possible. So all of the other small houses have basically a 3x3 space inside. They are very, very small houses. And since we're in the swamp, I think the key feature of our houses here are going to be that they're on stilts. Now, I don't know if the villagers will be able to get up into these houses, because I don't think they can climb ladders, so we'll have to make like a stairway up to them. But anyway, because of the water, I think this makes a lot of like sense, really, you know, like real life sense. Water here, you need to have your houses on stilts. So we'll create a little framework like this. We'll create the floor inside. So this is the amount of space we've got. And then we need to create the hut around it, which shouldn't be too difficult because the Mojang houses, they are fairly simple. Some of them are really nice, even though they're simple. So I think that's what we're going for. We're going for as simple as possible, but still look nice. Now, for the roof, I'm going to use dark oak wood. And I'm going to use the six-sided one so that there's none of this part of it. There's none of the inside of the log, because I think that will look cleanest. But I don't know if Mojang would actually use that in their builds. I think this is basically the start of our houses. We just need to decorate them a tiny, tiny bit. So maybe a chimney, just a few blocks high. Definitely want to include some of the new stuff like lanterns. So maybe on the corner of every single one we have a little lantern. We need to create a way for them to get up. So dark oak stairs seems like the most sensible way. Now I've really inspected all of the different villages and the different techniques that they do. So when they do staircases like this, they don't actually have upside down staircases. What they have is a hearth slab like this instead. I've also seen them use potted plants, so maybe we'll add a fern there as well. They've all got doors. Doors are important, and of course we'll have to add something inside. So this is just a generic room. There's nothing really to it, so you could add like a chair and a bed, and that's basically it for that room. I think we could add some water underneath to make sure that it really makes sense why it's on stilts, have some water underneath. For the windows, I'm going to add a simple fence gate in there and then add a trapdoor either side. I've seen this done in the other villages and it works really well, keeps it simple and keeps it in theme. And I think that is pretty much our first house. The difference between this and all of the other villages is the stilts mainly. This house is actually very similar to all the others. It's just the fact that it's going to be a lot taller. Maybe Mojang wouldn't have this 2 blocks. They would only have it 1 block. Maybe I'll change that. But I think the last thing we can do is add vines. That's what's really going to make this feel like a swamp hut. It's the vines growing off of it. There we go. First hut in the village. And I think that fits rather well. It does look quite big, which is a little bit of a worry. So maybe there'll be less buildings in this swamp village. Now, not every single village has all of the professions. So if you're unaware, each villager has a different profession, and you can see all the different types here. So you've got farmer, fisherman, shepherd, fletcher, librarian, cartographer, etc, etc. All of those blocks, you can get a different villager for them. I'll tell you what, I think I'm going to make each and every single one of them, but we won't include all of them in our village. So now that we've done one hut, I think maybe we should do a larger hut. Now, there is a lot of water around, and I've done a bit of research. I found basically a village that is entirely on the water, and if there's a building that spawns there, basically what it does is it just creates an island around it. It's not particularly pretty, but it basically creates 3 or 4 layers of dirt, and it basically plonks the island there and then puts the house on top of it. So I think maybe that's what we're going to do to try and keep this looking as original and Mojangy as possible. What I think I'm going to do here now is the large house. So basically it's the upgraded version of the one we made over there. Since this one is particularly similar to that one, I think what we're going to do is quickly time-lapse this one. Since it's such a small build, it really won't be worth me talking about it, but it's going to look very similar to the one we've already made. Okay, so the large hut is actually complete. It is a little bit bigger, but I think I need to talk about the actual internal space. So with this one, oh, I actually forgot the lantern. So all these little details that make the big difference on this. So we've got our little hut, and now we've got our big hut, and we're going to add a couple of lanterns just to see this one finished. So the big difference here is it's got this little space here and it's a bit taller, but overall it's not actually much bigger, because in the Mojang villages there's not a lot of thought about how much space you get on the inside. They might have a chair and a bed, and this space probably won't even be used. There might be like some flooring here and then some ladder that goes up for the player to explore, but I don't think the villagers can actually use ladders, so that's pretty pointless as it is. I think this one looks better by far, but in contrast to the size of the town centre, this one looks closer to what it might really look like if this was naturally generated. So I'm actually going to move this down. Okay, I think that looks a bit better. So now we have 2 houses in our village. It does look pretty lonely. Now we need to start making some of the professions. Now, I have actually put together all of the other villages in a line to be able to compare them. So in order to get this right, I think we need to do a bit more investigating. So here we have all of the villages in a line. This took an awful long time to put together, but it allows us to sort of highlight the different parts of a village. So for example, what we have here is the weaponsmith hut, and one of the big characteristics of this is this pool of lava surrounded by stone so that it doesn't catch on fire, and then a grindstone. So the rest of the building is actually pretty normal apart from that defining characteristic. And there's one on the inside as well. Other than that, not a lot going for it. This one is an armorer house, and it hasn't actually got much going for it in terms of looking like an armorer house, except for on the inside you have a fireplace with a blast furnace. So that's the big thing that sets this one apart. Let's just take a couple more examples. So let's go over to the Plains village. You'll see these are actually all belonging to a certain profession, but you can't actually tell unless you go inside. So this is a Fletcher's hut. You can see that there's a bit more detail on this house, but the only defining characteristic really is the table on the inside. The shepherd's house, the same. You've got another house, but then it's got a pen out the back. So we really just need to find the defining characteristics of each of these houses. For example, on this one, it's the tannery, and they've just got cauldrons. But for the most part, it's a normal looking hut. So I think this gives me enough information to be able to create the same thing for the swamp. I think the profession that makes the most sense in the swamp is the fisherman's hut, so I think that's what we should make next. The next problem is actually just choosing a place for it to go. Now, obviously, when these villages just spawn in naturally, they just go anywhere. But I actually have to think about it because I'm making this by hand. I think it probably makes most sense to have it somewhere like this. So all of the other fisherman huts have been incredibly small. So I think we're going to go for something similar. Very, very small in design. One of the key characteristics of the fisherman hut is indeed barrels. So that's what we're going to make sure is on this hut. I'm actually going to make sure that there's a bit more variation in this one compared to the others, because you don't want them all to have exactly the same roof style, otherwise none of the buildings stand out at all. So instead of having this go all the way round, this one's just going to sort of sit on the top like an upside down bowl. Other than that, we need to keep it as consistent as possible, so the same windows, same trapdoors, everything. Don't forget to add the lantern for a bit of light. The front door, I think that looks really, really cool. That is identifiable as the fisherman hut because of the barrels, but it still looks like a normal hut. The village is actually really starting to come together now. So I've placed down the wool that represents a house. So red is some sort of building in terms of like profession. I could paste more of these huts around, but I think it's probably better to try and get one of every profession into this village, even if normal villages don't have that. And then the yellow ones are actually like farms or animal pens, because there's always a couple of those around as well. And I think that will make up the village, and then we can actually spawn in some villagers and see if they go and do what they're supposed to do. That will be really interesting to find out. So instead of going over each and every single one in turn, what I think I'm going to do is turn this more into a time-lapse now, because obviously the style of the building is going to stay the same. It's going to be the same palette, and there's not going to be too much to talk about. So I could probably do this a lot faster, and there's a lot of buildings to get through, and I can talk about it in the time-lapse. So let's grab ourselves some popcorn and get into the time-lapse of this swamp village. So let's get into it, shall we? We're going to start off by making a few professions. The first one is the leatherworker, who has the smoker. We're then going to add in some farms for the farmers. This is going very quickly, so don't panic that you don't get to see all of the buildings. This is just a lot of small huts that don't take a long time. So I will go over each and every single one of these, and the ones that weren't included in the village after the time lapse. But I thought I'd rush through because, to be honest with you, there's a lot of the same style going on here. So it would be a lot of me just repeating myself. So let's just enjoy this very speedy time lapse, and maybe you can try and guess which one is which. Like, what house did I just make here? Some of them are more obvious than others. I talk about this a little bit later on, but most of the huts, you can't really tell what they are until you go in and see the profession block that is inside. And that's the case with all of the vanilla villages as well. Okay, that actually covered most of the buildings. Now, this isn't every single one because the village was actually getting really, really big. And I've got to admit, this is way too organized. It doesn't look like a naturally generated village at all because I've spaced them too equally apart. There needs to be some closer together, some further away, and I've just not done that. However, this does look, I think, like the kind of village I would expect in the swamp if Mojang had made them. But there's still a few little bits to do. So there's like little decorations that end up being spawned in, but the other thing is lighting. Little lights spawn in along the pathways wherever there's not a building. So I was thinking of keeping it simple with just some posts with a lantern on top. So 2 up and then a lantern. So if I add a few more of these, it will bring the town to life a little bit more. And then hopefully add a couple of trees in here as well, perhaps, that will help tie it all together. And then I think this village can be called done. But that's not the only thing that I want to show you. There's also small decorations like this, maybe a trough of water, or sometimes there's plants and stuff. But I think that works pretty well. I think what we need to do now is actually grab some villagers. In theory, I have created everything that you would need for a village. It's got the town center with the bell in the middle. It's got huts with beds in them. We've got all of some professions, like here's a Fletcher's table. So if we spawn a villager, well, there we go. Yes, he's taken on that role. And if I spawn enough, will we get a full village? Now, where's he going? Who have we spawned in here? We've spawned in a leather worker. If I spawn one in here, perhaps it will turn into a cartographer. Yes, there we go. So if I just spawn them in each of their houses, we might actually get a functioning village. Spawn in an iron golem to protect them. And I think this has actually worked out better than I thought. So here is a full swamp village made by me and not Mojang, but this is my recreation or my theory or my prediction of what a swamp village might look like if Mojang put it in the game, and it actually works. The villagers go and do their thing, they all spawn in, they all behave as normal, which is absolutely brilliant. I'm really happy with how this has come out. Now, there are some professions that didn't actually make it into this village because it was starting to get very, very crowded. I must admit, this isn't looking like it's naturally generated because of all of the spacing, like I said earlier, but I think this is a really good example of what this might look like. However, as I said, not all of the buildings ended up being used. Remember that big long list of all the different kinds of buildings that I wanted to show you? Well, I've actually recreated all of them in this flat world to show you what each one might look like on its own with a structure block. So let's take a quick look through them all. You can see that there's a nice line, it's all very organized, we've got all the town centers, and then here's the one we started off making at the start. And then we've got two different kinds of lights. And then we've got our first hut, which we made right at the start. This is the basis of every single building, so it was really important to get this one correct. We've got the medium house, which is, I guess, the larger one of all of them, and you can see the comparison there. So it's kind of in the same line in terms of size, it's just a bit taller because of the stilts. If we move on, there's actually an animal pen. This one didn't make it into the village because it just didn't fit properly. But you can see it's a similar size to all the other animal pens, and those are more complicated than I thought. We've got ourselves some farms, which I've added into the village. And then we've got the Fisherman Hut here, which is exactly as it was in the actual one. This one made the cut because that makes so much sense. I would imagine that a swamp village would have loads of these. Then we've got our Butcher Hut, which we actually included in the village. It's got the smoker here. And I put this outside because it didn't really, didn't make sense putting it in there. I wanted to have stuff outside of these huts because they do look very samey. This is the cartographer's house, of course, which is really tall. I thought I'd make this one extra tall because a cartographer kind of makes maps and stuff, and I figured, you know, he'd want to be able to see over in the distance. Next up, we got the weaponsmith hut, and this one has the lava. Had to be extra careful with this one when making it because this lava actually causes some fire spread, and that can cause damage. But otherwise, the hut is pretty much the same. And then we move on to the toolsmith house, which actually didn't make it. This one actually has a different roof in a similar style to the snowy tundra one over there. But this one actually looks really, really nice as well. This one's more of a decoration. It's not really a house, but this is the armorer because you've got the blast furnace here, but it's more like a decoration one like this where it's just in the village. To be honest, I could have put this somewhere in our village, in our swamp village that we made earlier. We've got the mason's house, which is very simple. Most of these are basically just huts. This one did make the cut, but most of them, if we compare them to the other villages, they're just huts. From the outside, you wouldn't be able to tell that this was an armorer's hut unless you learnt it. There's nothing on the outside that says it. So, for the most part, they just look like huts until you go in and you see the tool that's in there. Here we have the Fletcher's hut, which we actually put in the main video. And then we have the shepherd's hut, which also made it into the village. And the tannery hut, which I don't think actually made it. But this one is just cauldrons in here. There's nothing major to find in here. And like I said, it's all in the same style, which is why these all look kind of samey. But it's the same story with these. There are some that stand out, like this one. The temple always stands out, which is why this one in particular has a bit more height to it, and it does actually stand out quite a lot. But the rest of them, these all look very similar, just a different style on the roof there. So this one's a big triangle, this one has a little outlet, this one goes, sort of has 2 peaks there. So I've kind of tried to do that with all of these. But I'm afraid that is it for this video. But of course, there is another village that we could theorize what it looks like. If you enjoyed this video and you enjoyed sort of trying to predict what these might look like, if you want to see the jungle village, let me know in the comments below, because I had a huge amount of fun creating this along with Imaxe, Elias, and along with Tenku as well. We all theorized on what these might be, and we tried to keep it as in line with the naturally generated stuff. Hopefully, this all looks like it could work together if put together. If you want to see a jungle one, like I said, let me know in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this video, and goodbye.